On a frost-kissed morning in Ashbourne Manor, Elowen first saw the Earl, not as a distant figure of nobility, but as a man whose eyes carried secrets, longing, and a warmth she never expected in the heart of winter. The first snow of December had settled over Ashbourne Manor, with the delicate insistence of a secret whispered. Icicles clung to the eaves, and the evergreens were dusted in white, so that even the most ordinary garden appeared touched by magic. Inside, the manor was a swirl of candlelight, laughter, and the scent of spiced wine. Yet in the heart of it all, a tension lingered, silent, unacknowledged, but palpably felt by all who moved within its halls. Earl Jonathan Ashbourne, tall and impeccably composed, paced the library with the ease of a man accustomed to control. Yet tonight, control eluded him. His coat hung perfectly, his boots shined, yet there was a restlessness in his gaze. The Earl was a man used to decisions, to power, to the certainty of protocol, but something in the winter air had unsettled him. Perhaps it was the snow, or the fleeting scent of pine from the hall, or perhaps it was the unexpected, unwelcome warmth of curiosity and longing that had begun to gnaw at the edges of his composure. Meanwhile, Miss Elowen Heartfelt, visiting distant relatives in the manor, had stepped outside for a momentary escape from the glittering social tide within. She was wrapped in a cloak of deep emerald velvet, her gloves clasping a small muff, and the pale light of the lanterns caught in her hair as she walked carefully across the snow-laden path. She had not meant to linger, yet something about the quiet, unbroken white expanse drew her deeper into the garden. Each step left a small imprint, fragile and temporary, as if the snow itself were a canvas upon which she traced her fleeting thoughts. Jonathan noticed her immediately, though he claimed to himself it was nothing more than politeness. The way she hesitated near the fountain, the way her eyes lifted to the frosted treetops, it was a picture of serenity and solitude that unnerved him more than it should have. He approached slowly, boots crunching softly in the fresh snow, hands clasped behind his back. He was, after all, an earl, and every movement, even in casual pursuit, was measured. "Miss Heartfelt," he said, voice low but carrying, so that it did not startle. "You wander the snow as though you own it." She turned, startled for a moment, then relaxed upon seeing his familiar, yet imposing, presence. "My lord," she said, curtsying lightly, though her cheeks were flushed with cold and perhaps something else, an unspoken thrill. "I merely enjoy the silence. It is rare in such a house." He inclined his head, eyes scanning the snow around them, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the two of them, framed by frost and the distant glow of lanterns. "Silence is often more revealing than conversation," he said. A flicker of something unguarded passed over his face, regret, curiosity, and an emotion that no etiquette could properly name. Elowen smiled faintly, sensing the shift. "Perhaps," she said, stepping closer, though not too close. "Or perhaps it merely reminds us of what we have been trying to avoid." His brow arched slightly, intrigued. "And what, pray, have we been avoiding?" She hesitated, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The question was dangerous, more intimate than any social interaction required. "The truth," she whispered, barely audible, "about ourselves." Jonathan looked away, if only to hide the quickening pulse he could not yet admit. The truth about himself was a complicated affair. The Earl had long kept his heart under lock and key, bound by duty, reputation, and the cold expectations of society. And yet, as he looked at her, Miss Heartfelt, so lively and perceptive, he felt a tug, subtle yet insistent, that threatened to unravel every carefully constructed layer. The wind picked up, swirling snowflakes between them, and Elowen shivered. Jonathan, with surprising gentleness, draped his cloak around her shoulders, the rich fabric, warm and fragrant, with cedarwood. "There," he murmured, voice rough, with a rare vulnerability. "You will not freeze." She looked up at him, eyes wide in the lantern light, a smile tugging at her lips. "You are not unkind," she said softly. He allowed himself a small, rueful smile. "Kindness is a dangerous indulgence," he said. "Yet, some indulgences are worth the risk." For a moment, Neither spoke. The snow fell in quiet insistence, covering the garden in white, covering the uncertainties, the social conventions, and the silent stirrings of hearts that had begun to notice one another. And then the distant sound of the manor's bell, announcing dinner, announcing obligations, announcing the inevitable return to decorum, broke the spell. Elowen stepped back reluctantly, her hands still warm in his cloak. "I must return," she said, voice tinged with regret. "Of course," he said, inclining his head, yet in his eyes lingered a question unspoken, a silent plea that the snow, for at least a moment, might hold them in its magic just a little longer. As she walked away, Jonathan remained staring after her. The garden was empty once more, yet the imprint of her presence, the delicate disturbance in the snow, the faint trace of warmth from her cloak, remained. He knew, in a quiet, undeniable way, that this encounter would not be the last. For the Earl, for Miss Heartfield, and for the winter night that seemed to conspire with fate itself, something had begun. A slow, irresistible bloom of curiosity, longing, and a promise of warmth that might, if they dared, defy every rule of their rigid society. The following evening, Ashbourne Manor glimmered in soft candlelight, each flickering flame reflecting upon polished wood, gilded frames, and the occasional curious eye of a guest. The grand hall was alive with the murmur of conversation, laughter restrained by civility, and the gentle clinking of glasses filled with mulled wine and punch spiced with cinnamon. Outside, snowflakes danced endlessly, coating the gardens in pure white, while inside, the warmth of hearths and candlelight promised comfort, yet also stirred hearts to dangerous inclinations. Earl Jonathan Ashbourne had taken his usual post near the tall windows overlooking the snow-laden gardens, glass in hand, yet untouched. His gaze, though polite to the party goers who approached with bows and murmured pleasantries, kept returning to the sight he had glimpsed the night before. The solitary figure of Miss Elowen Heartfield stepping gingerly across the garden, wrapped in her emerald cloak, untouched by frivolity yet luminous in her quiet grace. Elowen, for her part, moved through the hall with the poise expected of any visiting gentlewoman, yet she was keenly aware of the glances cast her way. Some were merely polite curiosity, others barely concealed amusement, and a select few carried the unmistakable weight of interest tinged with admiration. But it was the Earl's eyes she sought and avoided in equal measure, a dangerous game of proximity and restraint. She knew it was improper to notice him so, and yet every measured bow and polite turn of her head betrayed her thoughts. As the evening wore on, a sudden lull in the festivities presented the perfect opportunity. The orchestra, taking a momentary respite, left the guests to their conversations and the crackle of the fireplace. Elowen found herself in the library, ostensibly seeking a rare book of poetry, though in truth, it was merely a pretense to be alone, or at least, less observed. Jonathan appeared shortly thereafter, gliding into the room with the quiet authority of an earl who knew every inch of his estate, as intimately as he knew the expectations of society. He paused at the threshold, noticing her by the fire, the lamplight catching the soft contours of her face. "Miss Heartfield," he said softly, voice carrying an unusual warmth, "I did not expect to find you here." She looked up, startled, yet pleased. "My lord, She paused, struggling for the appropriate words that would neither offend nor overstep the unspoken boundaries. "I merely sought a moment of peace," she said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. He inclined his head, moving closer. "Peace is a rare commodity these days," he murmured, his gaze fixed upon her as if measuring not just her words, but the emotions they veiled. "And yet, here you are, seeking it alone, while I, by circumstance, find myself observing you." A soft blush warmed her cheeks, and she lowered her eyes, feeling the unfamiliar flutter of unease and anticipation. The library, with its high shelves, the faint scent of old leather and pine, and the flicker of candlelight, seemed a world apart from the revelry outside. For a moment, the etiquette, the social codes, the unspoken expectations, all faded into irrelevance. "Jonathan," she breathed, using his given name in a rare moment of intimacy, though her voice carried the caution of propriety. He lifted a hand, stopping her, yet not in command, but in a gesture that seemed almost protective. "Do not speak yet," he said, voice husky. "I would hear you, but only when your words are free of hesitation." She studied him, truly studied him, noting the tension in his posture, the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, emotions seldom displayed, even to those nearest him. "You are unlike any Earl I have known," she whispered. "And yet," he said slowly, stepping closer so the warmth of his presence brushed against her, "perhaps unlike any gentleman you have imagined too." Their proximity, though not scandalous, was intimate enough to send her pulse quickening. The snow outside continued its silent descent, muffling the world beyond the library walls, enclosing them in a private universe of candlelight, scent, and whispered emotions. Finally she spoke, soft but resolute. "Why do you look at me so, Jonathan? As though you are searching for something neither of us dares name." He did not answer immediately. Instead, letting the silence stretch, deliberate, charged, then, with a voice barely above the flicker of the fire, he said, "Perhaps I am searching for what is lost in the world of propriety, what is too often hidden beneath the weight of expectations. And yet, here it is, standing before me unafraid, radiant, and real." Elowen's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to retreat, to flee, yet the truth in his words anchored her. "And if I am unafraid, and radiant, and real," she murmured, "what then? Are we doomed to remain mere shadows of ourselves in the eyes of society?" He took her hand gently in his, the contact electric, the touch laden with unspoken promises and restrained desire. "Then we must find a way," he said, "to exist not as shadows, but as ourselves. If only for stolen moments such as this." The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the hearth, and the snow outside sparkled as though the universe itself conspired to bless the delicate beginnings of what was forming. A slow, perilous, and beautiful bond. Uncertain yet undeniable. For Elowen and Jonathan, the night was both an awakening and a challenge, a prelude to a winter of secrets, longing, and the subtle stirrings of hearts that would not be denied. And as they parted, each retreating to the obligations of the evening, both were acutely aware that nothing in Ashbourne Manor, or the snowbound world outside, would ever feel quite the same again. The morning after the library encounter, Ashbourne Manor lay quiet beneath a thick blanket of snow. The world outside was softened by the white expanse, trees bent under the weight of frost, and the frozen gardens glimmered in the pale winter sun. Within, the manor hummed with preparation, servants bustling about, arrangements for the upcoming Yuletide ball, and the constant undercurrent of expectation that accompanied the holiday season. Yet, for Earl Jonathan Ashbourne, the grandeur of the manor, the festivities, and the ceremonial etiquette felt hollow without her. Elowen Heartfelt, meanwhile, navigated the corridors with careful poise, her mind a tumult of thoughts she could neither control nor suppress. The stolen moment in the library replayed incessantly in her mind, the intensity of his gaze, the warmth in his voice, the brush of his hand against hers. It was improper to think so deeply of the Earl, and yet she could not help it. She felt drawn to him, a magnetic pull she neither understood nor wished to resist. By midday, a light snow began to fall again, tiny crystalline flakes drifting lazily through the air. Elowen ventured into the garden under the guise of enjoying the winter scenery, the hem of her cloak brushing against freshly fallen snow. She paused by the fountain, where icicles hung like crystal daggers, and allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Her breath formed little clouds in the cold air, and in that solitude, she felt both freedom and vulnerability. Jonathan, having observed her from a distance, approached silently, his footsteps muffled by the snow. "Miss Heartfelt," he called softly, careful not to startle her. She turned, her cheeks pink with cold and emotion alike. "Earl Ashbourne," she replied, keeping her voice steady, though her heart raced. "You walk these gardens often, do you not?" He stepped closer, allowing a respectful distance but closing enough to feel the shared chill between them. "Only when the world outside seems too harsh for the heart," he said, "and today, it seems the cold is necessary to clear one's thoughts." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And have your thoughts cleared?" she asked, tilting her head with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He hesitated, searching for words that were neither too revealing nor too evasive. "Perhaps," he admitted, But clarity is often dangerous when it reveals truths we are unprepared to face. Elowen's gaze fell to the snow at her feet. "And what truth might that be?" she asked, almost daring him to speak the words she feared and desired to hear. Jonathan took a measured breath, the winter air crisp between them. "That one cannot remain indifferent to certain presences, Miss Heartfelt. That some souls rare, luminous, and defiant of expectation, demand notice, whether we wish it or not." Her pulse quickened, and she met his gaze fully, daring to challenge propriety. "And if that soul," she said softly, "feels the same, what then? Do we obey the rules of society, or do we risk everything?" The Earl's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability flashing across his otherwise composed features. "Society is relentless, unforgiving," he murmured. "Yet, I find myself contemplating the audacity of risking everything for what is true. For you, Elowen, I am tempted to defy even the weightiest expectations." A gust of wind swept through the garden, rustling the snow, laden branches and scattering delicate flakes around them like silver confetti. In that fleeting moment, the world seemed suspended. The cold, the snow, the manner, the expectations, all fading to insignificance compared to the unspoken understanding between them. Elowen felt her heart trembling in a mixture of fear and desire. "And yet, you have never asked me to step beyond propriety," she whispered, almost accusingly, though her words betrayed her longing. "I do not ask," Jonathan said, his voice low, intimate, and sincere. "Because I know that some choices must be made freely, without coercion, without expectation. But I will watch, and I will wait, if only for the rare moments when you permit me near." She swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of his presence and the weight of his words settle within her chest. "Then we are suspended in this moment," she said, "between what we are expected to do and what our hearts demand." He nodded, eyes locked on hers, a silent promise lingering in the space between them. "Suspended," he echoed. "And yet, in suspension, there is a kind of clarity, and perhaps a hope." The snow continued to fall, each flake a silent witness to the burgeoning tension, the tentative desire. And though the day would end, and society would resume its ceaseless scrutiny, in this garden, amidst the winter's quiet splendor, both hearts had found a moment of truth, fragile yet undeniable. As they parted, each retreating to their respective duties, a subtle awareness lingered. This was no fleeting intrigue. This was the beginning of a connection that would challenge every rule, every expectation, and every fear they had ever known. The Earl and Miss Heartfelt were drawn to one another, inevitably, irresistibly, and the winter had only just begun to bear witness to their story. The evening descended upon Ashbourne Manor like a velvet curtain, soft and suffused with the scent of pine and wax. Candlelight flickered across the polished wooden floors of the grand hall, casting long, dancing shadows along the walls. Outside, snow fell silently, muffling the sounds of the world beyond the estate. The manor itself seemed to exhale a warm, golden glow, a cocoon from the bitter cold that lay beyond its walls. Elowen moved carefully through the hallways, her silk gown whispering against the floor, a soft echo in the otherwise silent manor. She carried a small tray of candle holders, intent on lighting the guest rooms before the family arrived for dinner. Yet, her mind wandered relentlessly, circling back to the garden, to the Earl, to the weight of his gaze, and the intensity of his words. Jonathan Ashbourne, for his part, had excused himself from the study earlier, claiming a need for a solitary walk. Instead, he lingered in the corridors, drawn by an irresistible compulsion to be near her, though he knew propriety forbade intrusion. His boots tapped softly against the floor, a quiet percussion accompanying the steady rhythm of his thoughts. He found her in the eastern wing, near the fireplace that warmed the smaller sitting rooms. Elowen looked up, startled, yet pleased to see him. "Earl Ashbourne," she said, her voice gentle, carrying a hint of amusement and caution. "You wander far from the library this evening." He inclined his head, offering a polite, if not entirely sincere, smile. "I find the manor less forbidding when there is familiar warmth to be found," he said. His eyes flickered to the candles she held, soft light illuminating her features. Cheeks flushed from the cold, lips slightly parted, eyes glimmering with restrained curiosity. She set the tray down carefully, brushing her hands together. Familiar warmth, she echoed, almost teasingly. Do you seek it from the hearth, or from the company it shelters? He stepped closer, careful to remain within the boundaries of decorum, yet close enough that the faint scent of her perfume reached him, a delicate blend of winter, roses and something uniquely her own. Perhaps both, he admitted, voice low. And yet, there is a certain comfort I find only in your presence. Elowen's heart skipped. Comfort, she whispered, uncertain whether to feel scandalized or flattered. Is it proper for the Earl to seek comfort from a lady who is merely a guest in his house? Proper, he murmured, is often a distant concern when the heart finds what it desires. And my heart, Miss Heartfelt, seems intent on its own inquiries, heedless of rules or expectation. The fire crackled, sending a cascade of golden sparks into the room, illuminating the small particles of dust dancing in the air. In that intimate glow, their unspoken connection deepened, a fragile yet potent tether that neither dared to name aloud. Elowen took a tentative step closer, emboldened by the quiet intimacy of the moment. And if one's heart dares, what then? Do we confess, or do we remain suspended, as before? Jonathan's gaze softened, an unguarded warmth flickering across his otherwise composed features. Confession carries risk, he said, voice almost a whisper. Yet, the silence is far more perilous. To remain unspoken, unacknowledged, is to deny the very essence of what we might feel. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her gown, a gesture betraying the storm of emotions beneath her composed exterior. Then Earl, perhaps we must speak, if only to understand the shape of this possibility. He nodded, stepping closer until only the narrowest space separated them. Possibility, he agreed, is the first step. And from possibility, we may find courage, or heartbreak, but both are worth the risk. If one is brave enough to face them. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, sending a cascade of snowflakes past the glass, as if the winter itself bore witness to their fragile intimacy. Elowen's heart pounded, every beat a drum of fear, desire, and anticipation. I am afraid, she admitted softly, the words trembling like candlelight. Jonathan reached out, lifting a single strand of hair that had fallen across her face, tucking it gently behind her ear. So am I, he confessed, voice barely above a breath. And yet, I am braver in your presence than I have ever been alone. That is the truth of it. For a moment, the room held its breath along with them. The fire flickered, shadows danced across the walls, and the world beyond the manor ceased to exist. Here, in this private, candlelit corner of Ashbourne Manor, propriety, expectation, and fear were suspended, replaced by the unspoken promise that something remarkable was beginning between them. Elowen dared a faint smile. Then let us be brave, she whispered, her voice fragile yet resolute. Even if only for this moment. Jonathan's eyes glimmered with an unspoken understanding, a reflection of both hope and longing. Then we are brave, he echoed. And in that declaration, a subtle shift occurred, an invisible current pulling them closer, an acknowledgement that neither could retreat entirely from the heart's insistence. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and relentless, blanketing the world in purity. Inside, amidst the candlelight, warmth and quiet tension, the Earl and Miss Heartfelt had taken their first conscious step toward a connection that would test courage, propriety, and the very boundaries of their hearts. The winter night, so often cold and harsh, had become witness to a tender, fragile awakening, a beginning neither could fully name, yet both felt with undeniable clarity. Ashbourne Manor had transformed into a winter sanctuary, the snow outside piling in soft glimmering drifts that reflected the glow of countless candles within. The main hall smelled faintly of pine, cinnamon, and roasted chestnuts, a holiday aroma that seemed both comforting and bittersweet. Guests had begun to arrive for the manor's annual winter gathering, their laughter and light conversation spilling into the corridors. Yet for Elowen and Jonathan, the noise of the party felt distant, almost irrelevant, as though they occupied a world apart. Elowen had taken refuge in the library, ostensibly to admire the Earl's rare collection of volumes, though in truth, she sought solace and space to untangle her emotions. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending warmth into the room, while outside, the snowstorm created a quiet barrier, keeping the rest of the manor from intruding. Jonathan entered quietly, closing the door behind him with a measured, careful hand. He paused at the threshold, observing her, the way the lamplight caught the subtle curve of her cheek, the soft furrow in her brow as she studied a leather-bound book. His chest tightened, and he realized that every carefully maintained barrier within him, the decorum, the restraint, was being quietly dismantled by her mere presence. "Elowen," he began, voice low, almost hesitant. "I hope I do not disturb you." She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly, as if she had been expecting him all along. "Disturb me? No, Earl. I was merely attempting to occupy my mind with something other than." She paused, searching for words that would not betray too much. "Other than the unexpected weight of certain thoughts." Jonathan's lips curved in a fleeting, knowing smile. "Certain thoughts?" he prompted, stepping closer. "And pray, what might those be? Reflections on propriety, or on the warmth of candlelight and the allure of companionship?" Elowen's fingers twined nervously around the edges of the book. "Perhaps both," she murmured, cheeks warming. "Perhaps the propriety I must uphold, and the thoughts I dare not indulge. She hesitated, breath catching. "I cannot deny that some thoughts persist regardless of their appropriateness." He advanced another step, careful not to overstep boundaries, yet daring to bridge the small, intoxicating gap between them. "And I find that these very thoughts are shared," he admitted, "not in words, but in moments. In the quiet, fleeting moments, when the world seems suspended, and one is left with truth, so stark it cannot be ignored." Elowen swallowed hard, her heart pounding, each beat echoing in the silence. "Truth," she whispered, "can be dangerous. It strips one bare, leaves the heart exposed and vulnerable." Jonathan's gaze softened, eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. "Vulnerability is a risk we must take," he said. "If we do not, we remain prisoners of our own fears, and I am weary, Elowen. Weary of restraint that serves neither heart nor soul." The wind howled faintly outside, rattling the window panes, as though the manor itself were urging them toward confession. She dared a hesitant step closer, drawn by the earnest gravity in his expression. "Then, we must face it," she said softly. "The fear, the desire, the possibility of what might be." He reached out, gently lifting a stray lock of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. A gesture laden with intimacy, yet still tinged with propriety. "We must," he agreed, voice trembling slightly despite his usual composure. "And yet, I confess, I do not know where courage ends and longing begins. Perhaps they are one and the same." Elowen's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Then I am as uncertain as you," she admitted, "but certain of one thing. I cannot ignore what my heart whispers each time you are near." Jonathan stepped closer, now close enough that the warmth of his presence enveloped her. "Nor can I," he said. "Nor can I pretend that propriety outweighs the pull, the undeniable truth that has drawn me to you since the moment we met." For a moment, the library seemed to shrink around them. The room, the firelight, the snow outside, all fading into insignificance. Only the quiet, charged space between them existed, heavy with unspoken confessions and tentative longing. "Then what do we do?" Elowen asked, voice barely audible, trembling with anticipation. Jonathan hesitated, weighing each word. "We proceed carefully," he said at last. "Step by step, heart by heart, until the fear dissipates and only truth remains." She nodded, a mixture of relief and vulnerability softening her features. "Then we are embarking on a journey," she said, "into uncharted territory of the heart." He extended his hand, not commanding, not demanding, but offering an invitation and a promise. "A journey together," he said, "through winter storms, candlelit nights, and the fragile beauty of possibility." Elowen placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining, a delicate yet unmistakable bond forming in the quiet warmth of the library. Outside, snow continued to fall, painting the world in pristine white, as if nature itself were blessing the tentative awakening of two hearts, fragile yet unyielding, ready to brave the winter and whatever trials the coming days might hold. As they stood there, hands joined, and hearts brimming with unspoken hope. The distant sound of bells began to echo through the manor, heralding the approach of Christmas, a season of miracles, of warmth, and of beginnings that could not be contained, even by the strictest dictates of society. For Jonathan and Elowen, that sound was more than a herald of the season. It was a signal of what might be. A fragile, daring promise of love, and the first true step into a future neither had dared imagine, yet both longed for with every pulse of their hearts. The first light of Christmas morning filtered through the frost-laced windows of Ashbourne Manor, painting the library in soft golden hues. Snowflakes clung to the panes, sparkling like 1,000 tiny diamonds. Inside, the manor was quiet, save for the distant echo of carolers in the village, and the faint murmur of servants preparing the grand feast. Yet, for Elowen and Jonathan, the world beyond the library walls had shrunk to a singular fragile moment. Elowen perched on the edge of a high-backed chair, the Earl standing before her, his posture both formal and impossibly tender. The events of the previous evening had shifted something irrevocably between them. Barriers had been tested, hearts laid bare. Yet, in the crisp morning light, the vulnerability that had hung between them now seemed like an invitation rather than a threat. "Good morning, Elowen," Jonathan said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that no fire could rival. "I trust you slept well." She tilted her head, studying him. "I did," she admitted, "though my dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, echoes of our conversations. And yet, I awoke with a strange sense of peace, as though those shadows were finally dissipating." Jonathan's eyes softened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "Peace," he murmured, "is often found where the heart dares to tread beyond fear." And sometimes, in the honesty of confession. Elowen rose, her skirts swishing softly as she moved closer. "Then let us not tread cautiously any longer," she said, her voice a mixture of resolve and delicate apprehension. "I cannot feign propriety, while my heart rebels against it." He extended his hand, a silent plea and promise wrapped in that simple gesture. She placed hers in his, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grasp seep into her very soul. "Nor will I pretend that our emotions can be bound by etiquette or circumstance." The snow outside intensified, blanketing the manor grounds in purity. A lone cardinal landed on the branch visible through the window, its bright red feathers a stark contrast to the winter white, a symbol, Elowen thought, of resilience and hope. "Jonathan," she whispered, using his first name as though tasting it for the first time, "I have feared the consequences of my own desires, but I can no longer ignore the truth that has settled in my heart. And I," he said, drawing a step closer, "have feared that my restraint might cost me the very thing I have longed for all these months, longed for since the moment I realized that no company, no conversation, no seasonal delight could compare to the light your presence brings." Lowen's breath caught, the tension, the slow burn, the months of subtle longing and stolen glances, all converged in this moment. Fragile and luminescent, she reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from his brow. "Then let this winter morning mark the beginning of everything we have withheld." Jonathan closed the space between them with careful deliberation, his hands framing her face, eyes searching hers for any hint of hesitation. Finding none, he leaned in, and their lips met, softly at first, a tentative acknowledgement of shared hearts, then with the quiet, inevitable passion of souls, finally unburdened. Time seemed to stretch and fold, the library walls fading into insignificance as the world outside continued in gentle, wintry motion. Every snowflake, every flicker of candlelight, every distant carol became a witness to a love that had fought its way through propriety, restraint, and fear. When they finally drew apart, foreheads resting against each other, breath mingling in the crisp air, Elowen whispered, "Jonathan, whatever the world may think, whatever obstacles remain, I am yours, and I am yours, Elowen," he replied, voice husky with emotion. "Beyond titles, beyond seasons, beyond all the constraints that sought to divide us. Yours in truth, in heart, in every quiet moment to come." Outside, the bells rang once more, heralding Christmas with a clarity that seemed almost miraculous. Elowen and Jonathan stood together, hands entwined, hearts synchronized, and for the first time, the future, uncertain, fragile, and wondrous, stretched before them with promise, instead of fear. The snowlight spilled over the library, painting their joined hands in silver, and in that moment, Elowen realized that love, patient and steadfast, could bloom even in the coldest winters, transforming frost into warmth, silence into song, and longing into unbreakable devotion. As they turned toward the manor's festive halls, the first whispers of celebration greeted them, laughter, the crackle of the fire, and the subtle magic of Christmas. Yet the most profound miracle of all remained within the quiet bond they had forged, a love that would endure, a winter's promise kept at last.